Okay, good morning. I want to thank everybody for attending our webinar today. This is an exciting opportunity for us today. So as you know, in the video I sent out, security is a big part of the industry today. I think I don't need to sell any right on that. I think we all know how important that is. So we've developed a partnership here at SPC. And most of you know me, but some of you don't know me. My name is Gary Beach. I'm the president and CEO of SPC International. And I partnered with Eric Rockwell around security and been working with him for a little bit. And as I've gotten to know him and what he does and the partnerships he's developed, as I said in the video, we spent a lot of time converting break-fix companies to MSPs. I mean, literally thousands of them, over the years. And security is a big part of where we're all headed. And in my partnership with Eric, I said, we really need to help a lot of these guys who are trying to do this on their own or need some help or not sure what they should do. Why don't we see if we can educate them on what is out there and available to them to help them and or their clients move in the proper direction with respect to security. So he's put together a panel of clients of his that are actively working with him today, that's on the call with us today, and the accounting firm partner that he has as well, to essentially get on the call today and educate everyone on where we're headed with security and what options might be available to you as a business owner yourself in the space. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and have him, please listen to what he has to say. Super smart guy. I think you guys will connect with that. And by all means, at the end of the webinar today, if you want to have a chat with him, there's a link we sent you in the email that you can click on to schedule a meeting to talk to him and his team. And by all means, ask him questions today while we're on the webinar. With that, I'd hand it off to Eric.
Well, thank you, Gary, and thank you for having us here today. I'd like to also introduce our panelists, James and Sam from Strategic Technology Solutions in California, and Kevin from MAP Cybersecure. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having us.
Morning, Eric.
So, Kevin, you are from our auditing and assurance partner, MAP Cybersecure. You guys are actually coming in and looking at evidence that's presented by MSPs like STS to test the security controls they have and validate that they're functional, policy-driven, actually working, being reported and managed on, and issuing an Ssae 19 audit report. Is that right?
That's correct. What we've done is we've created a separate accounting firm that's affiliated with our traditional accounting firm, so the separate entity that's been organized as MAP Cybersecure, and it's been developed for the sole purpose of issuing reports, primarily Ssae 19 reports, to certify an entity's security maturity level according to the Center for Internet Security's top 20 controls. So we provide that certification, and that can be used by folks like the team at STS to differentiate themselves from their competitors.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kevin. So we're going to get into what that means, what it looks like, and how to get there in a few minutes. We're also going to talk to James and Sam about their journey and ask the question, James and Sam, you guys are an MSP, you guys focus on the legal vertical, and why would your clients care, or why would you guys care about having an accounting firm come in and issue a cybersecurity certification?
Yeah, well, first off, it helps us, essentially practice what we preach to our own clients, and we want to make sure that we're protecting our clients' information and valuable data, as we tend to hold the keys to the castle. And as we know, law firms are very sensitive around data. They get hit with audits, and they have certain compliances that they have to adhere to. So for us, it just makes it a world of difference to be able to prove and provide and show evidence that we are implementing our own security program, policies, et cetera.
Right. And not just law firms, but a lot of companies around the world are looking for the same type of evidence, and they're asking for primarily one of two things: an SSAE report or an ISO report that shows a lot of the same evidence, demonstrates trust. In this case, though, the controls that you guys are reporting on are very relevant, very modern. We're going to talk about those more in a few minutes. But you guys are able to show your clients the same thing, the same type of certification that their clients are asking them for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And that's what goes a long way. By the way,
Yeah.
James, can you tell us how often are you at, and the MSP that you're competing with also has an SSAE 19 certification?
Yeah, very rarely does that, that conversation, does that ever come up that we're competing against another MSP with that certification. And most of the time when I'm able to show, what we're doing internally and the evidence of that, it goes a long ways.
Right. That's awesome. So I want to talk for just a few minutes about why MSPs should get certified, what a security maturity level certification actually is, what does the report look like. And then I want to talk about what life looks like at a security maturity 4 level MSP like STS. What does a day in their life look like? And how did they get there? How would you get there? And how much do you budget for this sort of thing? So, as some of us know, cyber criminals have become the new face of organized crime. And these are not just people that are operating organized crime in one specific neighborhood. Cyber criminals have gotten together, they are organized, they work together all over the world, and there is no country or IP address that they won't attack. James and Sam, you guys see this in your monthly risk management meetings and quarterly security meetings. You see these attacks coming in literally from all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of companies, especially MSPs, thought they were too small to get attacked. Do you think that way now, James?
No, absolutely not. I think that's the big difference, is being able to see what is going on so you can do something about it, right?
Exactly. Look at some of these numbers. These numbers are from 2019. I can't wait to see the numbers from 2020. It's unfortunately getting worse and going in the wrong direction. Look at what cybercrime cost the global economy last year, $445 billion. I mean, this is so much larger than any sort of bank heist or crime, that local crime that we have to deal with on a daily basis or an annual basis. And this number is just getting bigger and bigger. I've heard some experts say it's going to top $1 trillion this year. And if you think about it, cybercrime is just getting easier and easier because everybody has remote access. Everybody has email. People are working from home. People were mobilized very quickly due to COVID-19. And a lot of IT teams didn't actually think about security or implement proper controls while they were mobilizing their workforce. Kevin, I think you've seen that with some of the accounting firms' financial clients. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Accounting firms across the profession and their clients have rapidly mobilized remote workforces, and we have seen companies that didn't use us to look at their controls. They were just regular accounting firm clients, and they have had ransomware attacks and breaches. So it's clearly a danger that's present.
check this out, 97% of phishing emails are delivering ransomware. These links are, or attachments are, that are malicious or very harmful. There's another type of threat actor that is successfully phishing passwords. We've seen over 50% of every company that's hosted at Microsoft 365 get breached this year. So that's a lot of Microsoft 365 tenants. Google has some similar numbers. So one thing that we're going to talk about today is why that's the case and how implementing these security controls and getting certified on them helps prevent ransomware and other forms of cyber attacks from actually being successful. It's not one magic thing or one magic bullet. James, as you guys went through and implemented these controls, did you notice how many layers there were that actually started making your organization more secure?
Yeah, it goes, it's not one silver bullet, and it is multi-layered approach. So, you just kind of continue to dig through those, but absolutely, it's very eye-opening for sure.
Here's some other numbers from 2019. 81% of businesses experienced a measurable cyber attack. 66% of small businesses suffered a data breach. 35% were victims of ransomware, and 22% had to actually cease business operations immediately because of ransomware. And the Center for Internet Security recommends wiping and reloading any compromised system you have to restore from a backup after conducting cyber forensics, figuring out when the threat actor was able to first inject their payload, and that equals days of downtime, best case scenario. I know that our security incident response team has helped a lot of organizations recover from successful ransomware attacks. James, I think your MSP has also been brought in to help organizations recover. Is that right?
Yep, we have.
And they're only down for five. They're only down for 5 minutes. Is that right?
5 minutes, 5 days.
It takes a long time to recover.
It does.
The other thing I wanted to mention are these password phishing threat actors. So when everybody was mobilized, threat actors started distributing fake emails pertaining to coronavirus alerts, links that looked like they were going to the CDC that weren't, links from Zoom that were asking people to activate accounts, and then ultimately directing them to a fake Windows login page, a fake 365 login page, asking for credentials, phishing credentials that way. They even set up a really nifty API to the real Office 365. So after you type in your password and your MFA code, it sends the MFA code to the real 365 and lets the threat actor in, while giving you a fake error message. So these attacks are getting more sophisticated. And what happens? MSP clients are starting to go out and hire MSSPs that are implementing security programs and auditing IT general controls that MSPs have been accountable for decades. And in some cases, those MSP clients end up firing the MSP at the direction of the new MSSP. The client asked for help. The MSSP referred them to an MSP that was actually certified like they are. And then, in some cases, the client spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with the new MSP and MSSP. I've got so many stories like this, it's ridiculous, to get to a higher security maturity level in 3 to 12 months. So this is a real number, by the way. I've got multiple stories of budgets this high. James, we've seen this multiple times. Companies that were not willing to spend money on anything, or law firms that were not willing to spend money on cyber liability insurance, were willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars implementing security controls either after a breach or after their largest clients started auditing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that's the bigger side, is once they start getting audited and realize, we may potentially not be able to do business with our client anymore, then the investment starts to really make sense.
So James, can you guys talk about how you're staying ahead of this and not being the MSP that is displaced by an MSSP and their friend?
Yeah, certainly. Well, we took a conscious effort to look at our business and business model and understand, what our skill set and capability is. And we never want to do something that is outside the box of, trying to, do something that we don't have the skill set on or the education on. So we understand security, we understand it to a certain level, but it also is a very specialized industry. So, we took that conscious effort to partner with your group, Eric, I believe towards the beginning of the year here now, which time flies. And, we wanted to implement a sound discipline around IT security. So not only, as I said earlier, we are practicing what we preach, but we can go to our clients and potential prospects and show them, the evidence that we are doing this. And in a lot of situations, demand a much higher dollar amount for services that we are providing. Not only our services, but our services as a collaborative group as well. So we get to leverage. And I think that, the really important part is leveraging that scale of economy with your group, because some things for the SMB world from a price point just don't make sense. But with the combination of our two groups, we're able to make that price point more realistic and something that is going to open their eyes because the benefit is so great.
Exactly right. And I think you've done a really good job also, James, of not just commanding a higher price, but doing it because you can demonstrate trust where your competitors have not been able to. And in fact, you've kind of flipped it around and said, hey, well, how much are those guys charging? $100 a month per user? Oh, man, I don't think there's any way they could possibly afford to do that if they were certified. Are they certified? And then the conversation just starts deteriorating as the trust in the other competitor erodes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it becomes a little bit more of a tangible as well, right? You can actually, ask a prospect to go, because they're looking at competitors. So ask them to go and ask the competitors these questions, which they likely will not have an answer for, or they'll have an answer, but they'll never be able to show the evidence.
Right. They definitely won't have a good answer. That's for sure. My favorite answer that one of our auditors got a couple of weeks ago was something like, "Yeah, we don't have to do security. We're not the NSA." And that was in front of their customer that hired us to come in and do an assessment on their security controls. So one thing that I want to talk about is security maturity. What is it? How do we measure it? First of all, this is not something that we just made up based on our years of experience or something like that. This is not something that Kevin and his team made up based on their years of experience. One thing at MAP Cybersecure, they can't just come in and say, all right, show me your magic security wizard tricks and impress us and we'll certify you. That's not how it works. In fact, they can't make up any of their own controls or way of doing things. What we have to do is demonstrate that a commonly recognized framework, controls from the Nist cybersecurity framework, have been implemented in a certain order based on an implementation group that's published by the Center for Internet Security. And we've implemented the controls the way that the Center for Internet Security has documented them in the top 20 critical security controls. So these top 20 controls have subcontrols. There's over 170 of these subcontrols that make up the top 20. And based on how your roles and responsibilities are defined in your security organization and what sort of processes you have to manage those controls and what sort of technology is helping to implement and measure those controls, that calculates your security maturity level. So there's 5 different levels, although the scale does start at 0.0. The first level is initial, then developing, defined, managed, and optimized. And we're going to talk about a day in the life of a security maturity level 4 MSP like STS in a few minutes. I want to talk about some of these lower levels. At level 1, cybersecurity activities are unstaffed and uncoordinated. That means that you have someone who is also in charge of 5 other things, who kind of does security ad hoc based on a potential threat. There's no formal security program in place, no policies in place, and despite security issues happening, no controls actually exist. James, does that sound maybe kind of familiar from 5 years ago in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the norm.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey up here. You guys now have roles and responsibilities formally established in your organization. You have organizational-wide processes. You have a formal, written and approved security policy. And you have actual verification in place to prove that you're meeting as a formal information security committee. You have a weekly and monthly process on top of that to measure and reduce risk. Your controls are monitored and measured for compliance. And you have a lot of automation. It's not 100%, but that sounds a lot like a day in your life, doesn't it?
Yep, absolutely.
Organizations that are in the Fortune 1000, they are starting to measure their supply chain, and law firms are in their supply chain. That's why lawyers are getting asked these same questions. That's why they're asking you these same questions. And also, it's not just law firms. There are lots of regulated industries. Defense is another big one right now. There's something called the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement that actually requires the implementation of these controls in a very specific way. We're going to talk about that more in a few minutes. The minimum security maturity level that a lot of your clients, James, will hold their law firms accountable to is a level 3. They want to see these roles and responsibilities established. They want to see policies in place. They aren't going to ask for evidence necessarily, like a full audit report, but if you can show them one, that saves the time of having to go back and forth. It demonstrates more trust. Now let's take a look at what's really going on. This was the average security maturity level of U.S. businesses last year, a 1.5. I mean, between initial and developing. And this is the typical score of an SMB. Surprisingly, most of the MSPs that we have measured over the past couple of years were a 0.75 when they started. And James, you guys were a little higher than this, but it was a similar level.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Not anymore, though.
Not anymore. Exactly.
And Eric, can I add a point here?
Yes, please, Kevin.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to make very clear to the audience here is that the security maturity levels that are being shown on the screen here and the controls that underlie that are not anything, as Eric indicated, that we made up. This is based on a defined framework, so there's no judgment whatsoever involved in the design of controls. The controls are either in place, implemented and operational, or they're not. And that's one of the things that we're doing, is providing evidence and validation that those controls are in place, and the collective body of controls represents a calculated security maturity level that we can certify and can be provided to third parties.
That's an excellent point. I'm actually going to show some examples of that in a few minutes and talk about what the reports look like, how we audit the controls. It's actually a great gateway to the next slide. So, Kevin, we get asked the question a lot, what does the AICPA have to do with cybersecurity, and when did they decide to get into IT controls? Was it just a couple weeks ago? Was it yesterday?
No, the accounting profession has been involved in information technology and information security controls for a very, very long time, as Eric is showing there. And there's been an evolution in the frameworks that are used, as Eric's showing. And the AICPA has worked very, very hard to position the accounting firm to provide assurance on security controls, because that's what we do as a profession. We provide assurance on information that people use to make business decisions.
That's exactly right. And cybersecurity has gotten so important, we can now deliver a report that is micro-focused just on cybersecurity, specifically for the vendor supply chain. So, James, guess what? Congratulations. You are part of the vendor supply chain for all the law firms that you work with. And as MSPs are in the vendor supply chain. If you have clients that manufacture widgets that get purchased by Boeing or Lockheed Martin and go into a warplane, you are in the defense supply chain. If you are providing services to healthcare organizations or hospitals, you are in the healthcare supply chain. And this type of report is not just something that gets issued one time. It's not a set it and forget it type of thing. It's something that you have to continue every week, every month, every quarter, and every year. That's why we call it a program. It's not just a project or a one-time event. I also want to talk about the difference between frameworks like Nist or ISO and regulations like PCI DSS or HIPAA. A lot of people ask us about the difference, or they say they want to comply with the Nist regulation. So Nist is not actually the regulatory body. Nist is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they define the cybersecurity framework that laws and regulations end up tailoring and adopting to one specific purpose, like keeping credit card holder data safe, or keeping protected health information safe, or keeping controlled unclassified information safe in the defense supply chain. So the framework is the family of controls. I'm going to talk about the Nist framework in detail here for a few minutes. What we see when we conduct an initial assessment typically is that MSPs have a whole bunch of detection tools in place, but they have missed several key elements of the framework, and they did not start with identification, meaning what is the scope of the business environment, what are the rules, what are our policies, what do we allow, what do we prohibit, and what sort of information assets do we have that are actually valuable, like a database of something, like an ERP system, like something that's key to the manufacturing operation. How valuable are these things? Is there a formal risk assessment that shows the probability of a cyber attack and the impact of a successful attack? And how do we mitigate that? Is there a process to implement a certain number of controls over time based on priority? James and Sam, let's talk about that for a minute. You guys, after you started this journey, you didn't do it all at once overnight. You prioritized the controls and started implementing them one after another based on risk mitigation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Do you think you could just implement all these controls all at once?
No, absolutely not. Not enough hours in the day.
Definitely not. I'm going to talk about the journey more in a few minutes, but this is a journey. It typically does take anywhere between 6 and 12 months for organizations to implement these controls. We've seen some organizations take 24 months to implement them. But now you guys have real access control procedures. It would be unlikely that a cyber criminal could trick your help desk into pressuring them into resetting a password, because there are controls in place to require additional approval before accounts are set up or changed. You give training on security policies every year. There's also some proactive technology in place that helps to secure all of your assets to the most secure but still usable configuration standards. That's called hardening. And James, I know that some of those hardening controls might be annoying at first, because you can't just run around installing whatever you want. But it's also nice to know that you can't run around and install whatever you want, right?
Yeah, or nor anyone else in the organization can, and everybody's bound by the same policy.
Exactly right. So one of the common mistakes that we see is organizations start implementing detection tools, security information and event management systems, vulnerability management systems before they've identified 100% of their assets. And if your detection tools are only based on installing software on an endpoint, James, what happens if you forget 1 or 2 of those computers?
Yeah, you're going to be in trouble.
You have a hole. Exactly. I also want to talk about CMMC. This is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. This is a certification specifically for companies that manufacture products and widgets in the defense supply chain, or provide a service to prime contractors or subcontractors in the defense supply chain. And what the CMMC has done is taken the NIST 800-171 security controls for controlled unclassified information and added their own 20 practices on them to get to a certified level 3. What we are doing with the SSAE 19s is showing that MSPs have implemented these same controls, not on controlled and classified information because they don't have access to that, but on the same sort of control families and practice areas like access control and security awareness training, configuration management. They've implemented these same controls internally, so they are a trusted vendor, and anyone in the defense supply chain that gets CMMC certified has to audit all of their vendors, so this really helps check the box if that's a vertical that you're focused on. So I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about what the report looks like, and talk about a couple of key points from the audit report. So this is an example of an SSAE 19 certification report. Here's a few key examples of content that's included. So this report actually shows the number of controls that are required by policy, the number of controls that are demonstrated, the number of controls that are reported on and measured by the business, automated, and it talks about how the organization implemented these controls, what implementation group approach they followed, and ultimately what their security maturity level is. You want to talk about that for a minute, Mr. Kevin?
Yes, excuse me. The important point I think to take away is that we are showing in this report, and there's a lot more to this report than what Eric's showing. There's also, what is also shown in many, many pages is a listing of all the different controls that have been assessed and evaluated, which is on the screen now. So there's the actual control reference to the Center for Internet Security's control framework. And there's the description of the control, the actual procedure that we perform to validate and provide evidence that the control is in place and operational. And if the the control objective has been met. So there's plenty of detail that supports the summary pages that Eric previously had up, but on the summary pages, what you're showing, and the important point is the actual security maturity level score. That's what, at the end of the day, if someone were to hone in on the key point and they didn't want to go through all the details, that's what they're going to be looking for.
Thank you, Kevin. One thing that I want to point out also that I really, really like is that this report goes into detail about all the different tools that an MSP uses to accomplish these results internally. And these are the same tools that you probably use for your clients. So James, this is a really good way to demonstrate that your organization is only using certified tools. You can't just run around and change to something that's cheaper tomorrow, because that might break a control. And if you do, you have to have proper change management in place. You have to demonstrate these controls to an auditor. So this does a couple of different things. It shows that you're using certified tools, and that helps justify your higher price point. If your client is certified also, and you have these same sort of tools in place, that makes it much harder to replace the MSP, and it makes the relationship much, much stickier.
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
Going back to some of the success stories we've had, we even had one time an MSP was being so defensive about their tools. We were actually going through and asking all of these same questions, just like we would during the real certification. We were assessing a hospital, and they had an MSP in there, and the MSP did not want to give out any of this information. They couldn't actually prove anything, and they were so defensive that halfway through the assessment, just asking these types of questions, the CEO opened up her laptop and actually fired the MSP right in the middle of the assessment. And the MSP that brought us in there got a call from the CEO of the hospital right after the assessment and said, well, I just fired the MSP that I'm working with. I'd like to know if you guys can give us a bid, because we have 60 days to transition over. So I want to shift gears now and talk about what life looks like at security maturity level 4. So a couple of things. First of all, you have somebody that is in charge of security management, an information security manager that would lead the actual incident response team if there is a potential incident, follow an incident response plan, document corrective actions and preventative actions that are taken or need to be taken, run a quarterly security maturity level assessment to make sure that your controls are still in place and functional and tested, conduct an annual risk assessment with the organization, and present a report to the Information Security Committee. This is a process of calculating risk based on probability and impact. So I'll give an example of that. James, let's say that you have your own cloud environment. You host a lot of law firms in your cloud. Your cloud has multiple locations. So I would say that if we're looking at availability, based on the controls you have, the probability of your cloud going down would probably be pretty low. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I'd agree.
And what would the impact be? Even if it's a low probability, if the cloud went down, would that be a high impact?
Yeah, it would be a huge impact.
So even though the impact would be high, based on the Nist risk assessment calculator, that calculates as a low risk. Even though it's high impact, the probability is low, it's a low risk. So we look at risk in the form of probability and impact, and that's how we prioritize the controls. We conduct annual security policy workshops, and we go through and look at what sort of controls are being adopted, change management, security, incident response, remote access, etc. These sort of policies are written formally and they're updated on an annual basis. And we map back to the specific Nist publications that, or regulations that these controls come from or are required by. And you have a process to train your team on the policies, James.
We do.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So your policies are not just pieces of paper that are written and put into a drawer. These are the policies that get audited, and we have to demonstrate that the requirements in the policy are actually functional. We also have to demonstrate that your whole team has been trained on the policy. They've signed a compliance agreement. They've signed in on a training sheet. It's done at least annually. And you have a process to deliver that same training and testing when you onboard a new employee. That's what goes into the SSAE report. And that's part of how you demonstrate this sort of trust to clients that may not have as mature of a security policy and awareness training program in place, but their clients are asking for one. Well, geez, we've got one. We actually do that in-house. We're already familiar with that. You guys also look at access review, and this is a process of looking at your different remote access systems. So here's an example. You've got the VPN here. You've got Office 365 here. You've got interactive logins on actual computers here, Citrix. So you're looking at all the different remote access systems that you have, and you're looking at who logged in by username and where they logged in from. And this is just an example, but you're looking for indications of compromise, like somebody logging in from the EU or the UK when you don't have anybody working from that geography. You're looking for these indications of compromise and things that stand out so that you can find out what really happened. Maybe an employee connected to a personal VPN or something like that. James, you guys don't allow personally owned devices at all. That's a great control, but you never know what might happen. That's why these access reviews are so important. And if there are controls in place like IP geofiltering, which in your case would limit logins to the United States, that's where you guys are located.
Yep.
And you have multi-factor authentication in place. Those are different layers of controls. And one of the common things that we see at your security maturity level in these access review meetings are successful logins from a foreign country. Let's just pick this one as an example. And the login was successful, but then it was stopped by the geofence, or it was stopped by the MFA. That tells us that the password has been compromised. It's become known to cyber criminals, and we'll see a huge flood of failed logins after that happens. So that tells us that even though the environment has not been breached, we still need to change the password. That's part of conducting an access review meeting. And this is some examples from a monthly risk management meeting. So once we know where the risks lie, we know where the doors and windows are, we know that they're locked, we're looking for threat actors that might break in. We want to look at the door locks that are weak, and we want to go through a process to reduce those weaknesses. We call those vulnerabilities. And part of James's security policy is to not have any critical vulnerabilities in place for more than 7 days. So that's something that we have to demonstrate when we are measuring and testing the controls. Are there any critical vulnerabilities in place? When was the last critical vulnerability discovered? How long was it in place for? This is an example here of something that would come up when the organization is reviewing threats. So threats, in this case, are actual cyber criminals that are trying to take advantage of a vulnerability. Now, this is from a few years ago. This is actually back from 2019. This is a real screenshot from an MSP, not FPS, but an MSP that was hosting their own LabTech server, and somebody opened up port 80 to the world. All of their logins were unencrypted when they went over port 80, and this known DDoS attacker in South Korea started sending 1.5 million DDoS attacks to this LabTech server, which got really slow. So these are examples of what you look at during a monthly IT risk management meeting. Then every quarter, you have a higher level security committee meeting with senior executives. This scales really well to the Fortune 1000. We have Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 clients that follow the same process. This is looking at your overall security program, making sure that you have updated and reviewed policies, looking at the roadmap if you're changing, revising, or rolling out new policies, measuring security policy training, making sure that new employees have been trained, getting an update on the security maturity level and security control implementation plan, reviewing actual security initiatives and security metrics like we just showed, reading incident reports if any incidents have occurred, looking at security policy violations like somebody violating the security policy, giving out their password, logging in as another person, going places they shouldn't, making decisions about security policies based on the data, and reviewing any exceptions if exceptions were created. We don't like exceptions. They usually lead to bad things, and we encourage organizations to not keep them in place for long if they're ever in place. That's why we look at them every quarter. And conducting annual incident response exercises. So if there's not a real security incident, that's the goal, we still have to practice and look at our response plan, test the communication, conduct an analysis on a breach scenario, document the mitigations, and document any improvements from the breach scenario. That's part of what we do every year. And once all these controls are in place and functional, we conduct at least annual penetration testing and red team exercises. And this is where we have a certified ethical hacker actually try to break in or socially engineer their way into the environment. This is more than just a monthly automated test. And a lot of companies want to lead with that. Kevin, that's one of the things that we see. Companies contacting Mass Cybersecure looking for a pen test. The Center for Internet Security recommends doing this last. It's still a critical security control. We still have to do it, but this is not something that you want to lead with. If we lead with a pen test, you're going to probably end up with a report that shows how easy it was to compromise 5 different things, and you never want to show that report to anyone.
Right, that is definitely putting the cart before the horse in this case. And I think it's just based on a lack of education of the whole process, which is what we're trying to accomplish today.
Exactly. These security controls are weighted by the Center for Internet Security. The top 6 controls, if properly implemented, would have prevented 85% of every breach that's been reported to the U.S. Computer Emergency Response Team and state breach reporting agencies in recent years. That's why it's so important. These are highly effective when they're fully in place. And we typically implement the controls in this sort of order, going all the way down to control number 20, the penetration testing and red team exercises. So now I want to briefly talk about how we get there, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. So this is, again, not something that happens overnight. This is typically a 12-month roadmap for an MSP or any organization that's starting below or around the security maturity level 1. And what we do is we come up with a security plan. We document who's going to be accountable for each control. That's called the control owner. We look at the implementation guidelines from the Center for Internet Security, figure out what level of effort it's going to take, what sort of additional procedures or tools we might need, like deploying single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. We harden the email environment and the server environment. We harden the network. We harden the assets, the Windows computers, to the Center for Internet Security's benchmarks. Those benchmarks, by the way, are thousands of pages long, and we see them missing almost 100% of the time during the first assessment that we conduct. But this is what helps prevent cloud environments from getting breached. We have, to this date, never seen a fully hardened 365 environment compromised. Every breach that we've investigated that had an Office 365 mailbox or environment compromised in some way, none of them were fully hardened. As a matter of fact, most of them were less than 15% hardened. And none of these things come hardened out of the box. James, you guys had to go through and spend a lot of time configuring all the technology assets that you control to these hardening benchmarks because they don't come hardened out of the box.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
So this typically requires a 12-month security plan. We've seen it done in less time. We've seen it done in 6 months. Those are rockstar MSPs that can do it that quickly. And they typically have a team of people dedicated to implementing and managing these controls. Most MSPs do it in a period of 12 months. Some take longer. And when we go through and implement these controls, that's when we go through the testing plan and make sure that we can demonstrate that a test passed and met the expected results. That's how we know that when we actually go through the audit at the very end, we have the evidence that we need to pass and we don't have to redo it again. This, by the way, is part of how we drastically reduce the costs that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Some of our competitors in the big auditing and assurance world, they charge hundreds of thousands of dollars for just the reporting process and the testing of these controls. They have other companies that come in and charge big monthly fees for tools, big monthly fees for implementing the controls. And through this approach where we know what the tests look like and we literally capture evidence to pass the tests while the controls are implemented, this helps us drastically drive the cost down. Would you agree with that, Kevin and James?
Yeah, absolutely. Doing this real time is far more efficient than going back in time after the controls have been implemented and gathering that evidence. So it's definitely more efficient.
I want to talk about the typical costs of implementing these controls. How much does a certification cost? How do you get there? Well, there are different levels, different implementation groups that are defined by the Center for Internet Security. And based on those implementation groups, this can be a small to medium-sized effort. The expense can range anywhere between $12,000 and $52,000, depending on how many of these controls and practices are implemented and actually being reviewed. But we have a process where we can actually have a credentialed security professional who's not going to participate in the audit help organizations implement these controls and present all of the evidence to the actual auditors. So we know that we're going to be in good shape when we actually present the evidence and get the report. So this range can go all the way down to as low as $12K if the organization is capable of implementing and self-auditing and producing the evidence on these controls themselves. So this is something that is achievable for even the smallest MSPs, and it puts you at a level with much larger organizations. In fact, James, you guys are going after some pretty large opportunities now because you can talk the talk and demonstrate the same things that the big guys can, right?
Yeah, no, it puts us in a great position to do so. And I think looking at these numbers, it's a small amount of money when compared to the value of the ROI and the benefit.
Yeah, James,
Exactly.
wouldn't you look at that, the cost outlay as more of an investment rather than an expense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I mean, first off, we would want to do it for ourselves internally, just being able to rest easy at night, knowing that we're protecting our clients' data and putting ourselves in a much, much lower risk category. So that's how I would start to view it. But then as we go down the road, the tangible of value and being able to present this to prospects and demand a much higher price because we know our competitors are not doing this, you know, that's where we see that investment really turn into an ROI.
Exactly. Well said. James, before we ask for questions, did you want to say anything else about the journey that you've been on?
No, I think just it's an eye-opening journey. And I think just that emphasis on it's a discipline. It's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of pain going through this. It's time-consuming to do it the right way. But again, at the end of the journey, and the journey really never ends, but you do get to a point where you really see the benefit. We're in a great position of protecting our MSP, our clients' data. We get to visually see that. It takes out the assumption and the guesswork. It makes us accountable to continue to do this. And I think, one thing that's really not often said, but our employees really respect it. Our employees respect the fact that we do have a very professional security practice in place and a discipline. And that does go a long way.
That's a great point. Has anybody quit yet because they couldn't install iTunes on their computer?
Just me. No, everybody's on the same page, and we all know what we can and can't do.
Well said. Awesome, guys. Gary, I wanted to turn things back over to you for questions before we adjourn here, sir.
Alrighty.
I'm just going to jump in there. Actually, we do have a couple of questions. First one is, why SOC versus ISO? Is SOC recognized internationally?
Yeah, so the AICPA, SSAE reports, and service organizational control reports are definitely recognized internationally. In fact, if we look at this map right here, we can see that the top 20 critical security controls that we're reviewing here are providing a higher than moderate coverage, whereas the traditional ISO 27002 controls provide a slightly less than moderate coverage. And we're looking at things that are very modern that were not necessarily taken into consideration or weighted the same way when this particular framework was published. And this framework has a higher weight on physical security. We put a higher weight on cloud security here because we know that we have mobile workers, mobile assets. We store information in multiple cloud locations, not just on-prem. And we're able to directly map back to regulations that have these same types of requirements. And by the way, every report internationally, we have a lot of international clients. We have some Fortune 1000 international clients, and they have all chosen to get an AICPA report over an ISO report. Some of them even left their traditional ISO reports. And I'm a huge fan of ISO, by the way. We are ISO certified. But Kevin, did you want to comment on that at all?
No, Eric, I think you covered that pretty well.
Awesome. Does that answer the question, Christian?
Yeah, we have another question here. So we have just archived our SOC 2 Type 1. So how will we align? We are also starting our SOC 2 type audit in March. I apologise if I'm not reading this quite correctly, but the cost shown is not what it cost internally? Question mark.
So the costs that we're showing, these ranges right here, this figure right here would be the lowest budget for an audit based on the implementation group 1 controls. This right here would be the cost of the certification and having a credentialed security professional help implement these group 1 controls. So this is not just an internal only or audit only budget. This does include both.
Okay, and how would that align, Eric, with the SOC, if SOC 2 audit? Because the other part of the question was the person in question is starting the SOC 2 type audit in March. Does this align with that?
Yeah,
Eric,
so let me talk about that for a moment. Oh, I was just going to say that if it's a service organizational control 2 type 2, this is looking at not just security, but a number of other controls across the organization. This typically maps back to a lower security maturity level because we are implementing a very basic amount of controls for security. There are additional controls put on availability, processing integrity, privacy. Sorry, did you want to say something about that, Kevin?
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to mention is there's a clear difference between a SOC report and the Ssae 19 report. And the main differences is that a SOC report is an audit report. And it involves not only an assessment and documentation of the actual controls, but the design of the controls. So and audit standards have to be followed with the SOC report, which drives the cost up significantly. What is different with the Ssae 19 report is we're not assessing the design of controls. Traditional audit standards that govern the accounting profession don't need to be followed, but at the same time, we can provide a certification on controls for which the design has already been defined and issue a certification on the security maturity level score, which a SOC report does not do. So it's really much more laser focused on being able to demonstrate that you're meeting the parameters of the top 20 controls for the CIS.
Right, it's micro focused on cybersecurity, just cybersecurity controls. All right, well, I think we've gone a few minutes over here, Mr. Christian.
We have, yeah. We do have another question, but we can take that offline, and we'll cover that. No problem at all.
Awesome.
All right, well, everyone, thank you. We appreciate your time today. I'm sorry for going over a little late, and we're going to obviously send you the recording if you'd like to have it. We also have contact information here for you to reach out to us via email, get a hold of Hannah, or you can call the phone number listed here. Again, we're going to send you a follow-up email with a link to an opportunity to schedule a meeting if you want more questions or have more questions. We look forward to engaging with you down the line. Thank you so much, everyone.
Right. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, Gary. Cheers.
All right, thank you, everyone.